I think there's a difference between an event planner and an event marketer, right? And it's kind of a step up to me moving in that direction. Event marketers, both have to understand the audience, but I think it's just a little bit of a variance there in the job and difference.
Yeah.
How have you
And
understood your audience to be able to execute for them?
well, I think it also is understanding the various internal roles, right? Like first off, I know like enough to be dangerous in the various settings that I'm
Yeah.
working with. Like I'm leaning into curiosity with my internal stakeholders to understand what their goals are.
Yeah.
I also think from that, again, it goes back to the show organizer and it's understanding the data that they're collecting. What data do you need to make your decisions to get that specific target market? Like that's what I'm looking at. Like when I'm like
Mhm.
trying to make decisions on whether I want to resign or not, I'm like, hey, what percentage of the folks that were here were X target? You know,
Mhm.
what percentage of them were from this specific, like, role within a company? So I think it's getting specific with them is really important and looking at the data to make your decisions. I think as event marketers, well, I think the question you're asking is like how do you differentiate yourself? And if you want to be an event marketer, I think for a while we were all following our guts, but now it's time to shift your mentality and look at what the data is telling you and make your decisions based off data. And most of the time, your gut and your data is probably going to line up, but it's looking at that to get buy-in from all of those other stakeholders that are like, well, I don't know if we need to be there, but it's like the recommendation is to be there. And this is why. So proving your case in that case and scenario.
So two things I want to go back to that you said. One is you said lean into curiosity when you were talking
Mhm.
about working with your internal stakeholders. Tell me a little bit about that because I think my take on that is that that's a high level thought process and it kind of gets you a seat at the table when you're in conversation because it means you're asking great questions and you're kind of learning the business end of things. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think there's so many, everyone's always like, oh, I want to be a marketer. There's so many various functions to being a marketer. And I think it's understanding, it's leaning into the curiosity of like, oh, well, like, what programs are you working on?
Mhm.
What are you like? What's important to you? What does success look like to you? What launches are you working on? Like, what excites you? Right? Like
Yeah.
building those connections and understanding like the purpose of each of the teams that have a seat at the table, so then you can bring them together. I think it's a lot about leaning into curiosity because I think it's really easy for us to say like, no, we don't need that. But like
Yeah.
in hindsight 2020, you're like, ooh, that would have been a really great add-on if we asked the right questions. Or sometimes I think what happens is like there might be the team that's like the loudest, that's getting the most attention, and that's totally okay. But it's asking them, why do you need this? Right? Like
Mhm.
I'm a big component of like asking why. Like, tell me why. My nephew always did that when he was younger, and it just always stuck to me. Is like, tell me why. Why do you
Yeah.
need this specific room in this specific setting? Help me understand so I can almost guide you to the right position. Like, once I understand more of the why, what you're asking for, I might be able to put it into something else versus creating an entire entity just for you. So I think it's when you lean into the curiosity, you can almost bring together more cohesive results.
I like that a lot. And I asked about it because I think from all the different conversations I'm having and talking to event marketers, I think some of the better event marketers and event coordinators, event planners, event managers, whatever the title may be, is when they are talking with leadership and they are talking with stakeholders by being curious and by asking business questions about the outcomes and the audience and the initiatives, they are elevating their status at that company as not just the event person, not just the
Yeah.
executor of the event person that's going to send them the agenda and get the flights booked and do, oh, yeah, they do the event stuff. When they start asking those curious questions, those smart questions, people sit a little taller in the room and they're like, oh, okay, like they get this whole thing that's going on. They're not just executing the event and ordering this. So I
Yeah.
think that's a really important point, especially for I think for younger women, which typically are event planners, marketers. I mean, is predominantly a higher percentage of women than it is men. And I think for younger women to have that confidence, to hear you say it and others that I've had on this show, which is like, feel free to ask these questions. You're not going to sound
Yeah.
stupid, right? You're going to sound like you want to understand initiatives, the business economics of the situation. Like how many deals do we really need to close to make this worth our while? Like, tell me what that looks like. And I think that's offering up a seat at the table and getting you, I don't want to say recognition because it's not recognition. It's just having somebody be like, wow, she gets it. And our events really have a better chance moving forward here.
Yeah, so I think what you might be trying to say is like once you're able to kind of lean into that curiosity and understand the why, then you're suddenly able to kind of create that strategy and create that
Yes.
POV.
Yes.
I think it's important, right? Like it's so easy to kind of show up and say, hey, like, okay, I need a 20 by 20. I need one like banner
Yeah.
and we're gonna display XYZ. But when you suddenly ask the question why, you're suddenly going in and leaning into more
Mhm.
purpose.
Yep.
And then you're able to also provide a POV. Like you're not just the one taking the orders, you're the one kind of coming in with a recommendation on what next steps should be or what this vision should look like, how to bring it to life. So I think, yeah, lean into the curiosity. Like, I
Yep.
think it just helps you understand the various nuances of marketing because not one department is the same. You
I
need it
think
all.
it really is when you start asking better questions in that sense and you are curious, it gives you twofold. One, it gains you the understanding of what needs to be accomplished so you can deliver better strategy through the events. And two, it does to a degree put you in better standing at your company. You then become someone that gets it. You're someone that is understanding the bigger picture versus just the execution. And I think that's vital. The next thing you're talking about was gut and data. I love that. I think there is a lot of data. It shows data is a very touch and go feel with associations and exhibitors and who says what. But I love what you're saying about like, hey, it's great that you have gut, but I think you also need data. You need the show's data. And I also think you need your own data year over year over year where you have your own to then make better decisions. Do you have any like specifics that you look at in terms of data or things, that you're requesting from the show or building out yourself that you're making sure that you look at?
So overall, yes, data is very important, and I think it does vary company to company. It goes back to like what does success look like? What metrics are you being asked to track, and then adhering to it, right? Like we
Yeah.
look at data, like when we're running some of these events, we're trying to understand what the next steps are. Like at Benjamin Moore, we would get an influx of all these leads and we're like, well, where does it go next? How do we
Mhm.
track it and say like this person came by and they bought this many gallons of paint? So it's understanding like the impact to the business or the impact to the awareness that you're having. And some of that stuff is like it's immediate. Like you know if an article is going to go viral or if it's going to get picked up by multiple news outlets. The popularity of something or the initial reaction to a new product launch, but it's what happens the 60 days, the 90 days, the 200 days, the 300 days, the 1 year
Mhm.
later. What story is the audience remembering?